They called him Jonas, the cook of the Beaumont plantation. Quiet hands, steady eyes, a man beaten down but never broken. By day, he stirred pots for his masters. By night, he crushed herbs in secret, whispering the name of the wife they sold away. When the harvest banquet came, the hall filled with laughter, silver, and wine. Jonas served every dish with a hidden purpose. Moments later, the music turned to screams. One by one, the masters fell at the very table they once ruled. But this was only the beginning, because once Jonas fed death to the powerful, he had to feed hope to the enslaved. And freedom bought with poison comes at a price no man can escape. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. Dawn broke over the Beaumont plantation with a pale, sickly light that barely penetrated the kitchen windows. Jonas had been awake for hours already, stoking the fire, preparing the breakfast breads, and setting water to boil. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the early hour. The kitchen would be an inferno by midday. He stirred a pot of grits with practiced precision, his movements economical after years of servitude. The spoon made gentle circles, never touching the sides of the pot, never making noise. Quiet was safety. Quiet was survival. "Too bland again!" Mistress Beaumont's voice cut through the kitchen like a lash. She appeared in the doorway in her morning dress, hair still not properly arranged, face pinched with displeasure. "I've told you 1,000 times about proper seasoning. Are you simple or merely stubborn?" Jonas lowered his eyes. "Sorry, mistress. I'll fix it right away." "See that you do. The harvest banquet is tomorrow night, and if you embarrass me in front of the governor's men, you'll wish you'd been sold to the sugar plantations." The words struck like a physical blow. Clara. His wife's face flashed before him, her smile, her gentle hands, the way she hummed while working. All gone now, sold south 3 years ago because Mistress Beaumont had wanted a new dining set. "Yes, mistress," Jonas replied, his voice hollow. After she swept out, the kitchen remained silent for several long moments. Then Mabel, the household maid, emerged from the shadows where she'd been standing frozen. "That woman," she whispered, anger burning in her eyes. "One day she'll choke on her own meanness." "Hush now," Isaac cautioned, appearing in the servants' entrance. The butler moved with careful dignity, his lined face revealing nothing. "Walls have ears, especially with all these guests arriving." Little Ruth slipped in behind Isaac, carrying a basket of fresh eggs. Only 12, she was small for her age, with quick eyes that missed nothing. "More fancy carriages coming up the drive," she reported. "Men with bright buttons on their coats." Jonas nodded, adding a pinch of salt to the grits. His hands were steady, but inside a familiar bitterness churned like poison. Every morning the same: cook, clean, bow, scrape. Every night the same: collapse in exhaustion, only to rise and do it all again. But the nights weren't all for sleeping. When darkness fell, Jonas would sometimes slip away to the edge of the swamp, gathering plants his mother had taught him about before she died. His mother had been known for her healing, a skill passed down through generations. But healing wasn't all she'd taught him. "Some plants take away pain," she'd whispered to him as a child. "Others bring sleep. And some," her eyes had grown distant then, "some bring the final rest." That night, while the big house slept, Jonas crept to his hidden space, beneath the loose floorboard, in the slave quarters. By the light of a single candle stub, he examined his small collection of dried leaves and roots, nightshade berries, crushed and dried, foxglove leaves, properly cured, seeds from the castor bean, ground to fine powder. His fingers trembled slightly as he sorted them. These weren't for healing. Morning came too quickly. The kitchen was chaos as Jonas directed preparations for both the day's meals and the following night's banquet. Through the windows, He saw more carriages arriving, military officers in pressed uniforms, merchants in fine waistcoats. "They're saying the governor himself might come," Isaac murmured as he collected a tray of coffee. "Something about militia funding and new trade agreements." Jonas nodded, watching a group of men laugh together on the veranda. Important men. Men who owned people. "Ruth," he called softly. "Come here, child." She appeared at his side, wiping flour from her hands. "Yes, Jonas? I need you to pick some herbs from the garden, the special ones I showed you by the fence line. Be careful, no one sees you." Her eyes widened slightly, but she nodded. Ruth was clever. She understood discretion. As the day progressed, Jonas worked methodically, setting aside small amounts of food. A bit of sauce here, a portion of pastry dough there. No one noticed. They never did. The cook was invisible, just another tool to be used. Mabel brushed past him with a stack of linens. 30 place settings for tomorrow," she whispered. "Biggest feast they've ever had. That woman is showing off again." Jonas watched Ruth slip back in with her small bundle of herbs. "Let her show off," he said quietly. One last time. By late afternoon, Jonas had hidden his gathered ingredients beneath a loose brick near the hearth. Mistress Beaumont swept through again, issuing more orders, criticizing everything. Jonas bore it silently, thinking of Clara, thinking of his mother, thinking of the 20 years he'd spent in this kitchen. As sunset painted the sky blood red, the house quieted. Dinner had been served, the day's work nearly done. Jonas sat at the worn kitchen table, a set of knives before him. One by one he sharpened them against a whetstone, the metallic scrape filling the silence. Scrape, scrape, scrape. The sound masked the vow repeating in his head like a prayer. This feast will be different. Mabel paused in the doorway, watching him. Something in his expression made her linger. "You all right?" she asked. Jonas looked up, the knife catching the last light of day. "Just preparing for tomorrow," he said, his voice calm and measured. "Everything needs to be perfect. Scrape, scrape, scrape." The metal gleamed, ready for its purpose. Night fell like a velvet curtain over the Beaumont plantation. The grand hall, once shadowy and silent during daylight hours, now blazed with the light of 100 candles in crystal chandeliers. Music from a small string quartet floated through the air, barely audible above the laughter and boasts of the gathered elite. Jonas moved through the room like a ghost, a silver tray balanced perfectly on one hand. His white serving jacket had been starched until it nearly stood on its own, a costume of servitude that Mistress Beaumont insisted upon for special occasions. Behind him trailed Isaac, Ruth, and 3 other house slaves, all carrying dishes that had taken days to prepare. "The roasted pheasant, sir," Jonas murmured, bending low to serve a red-faced planter whose jowls quivered as he laughed at his own joke. The man didn't even glance at Jonas, just stabbed his fork into the succulent meat, already reaching for his wineglass with his other hand. 30 guests filled the long table. Merchant families in imported silks, neighboring plantation owners with hands soft from never working their own fields, 2 militia captains in pressed uniforms, their buttons gleaming in the candlelight, all of them eating, drinking, talking over one another in their eagerness to be heard. And at the head of the table sat Mistress Beaumont, resplendent in a new gown of deep blue, her graying hair arranged in an elaborate style that had taken her maid 2 hours to perfect. Her husband, a silent man who preferred counting money to conversation, sat beside her like a shadow. "The Beaumont wine is especially fine this season," Jonas announced as he moved around the table, filling crystal goblets with dark red liquid. "A special reserve the master has been saving." The wine had indeed been special, until Jonas had added his mother's herbs to the decanter an hour before serving. Nightshade to start, just enough to blur vision and loosen tongues. The real work would come with the main courses. "I tell you," "Our cotton yield this year will be the highest in the county," Mistress Beaumont proclaimed, her voice carrying above the din. "My overseer has implemented new methods that have the slaves working twice as efficiently." New methods. Jonas's hands tightened around the wine pitcher. He knew those methods. The whipping post had barely cooled in weeks. "To prosperity," someone called, and glasses clinked around the table. "To prosperity," Jonas echoed under his breath, watching them drink. The feast continued in waves of rich food. Venison stew with root vegetables, roasted duck with orange glaze, fresh bread still warm from the oven. With each course, Jonas added more of his special ingredients. Foxglove in the gravy, castor bean powder mixed into the sauce, ground yew berries sprinkled over the garnishes, little amounts, different poisons, different dishes. Some guests would eat more of one thing, others more of another. It didn't matter. By morning, they would all reach the same destination. An hour into the meal, Jonas noticed the first signs. Captain Merrick, the younger militia officer, tugged at his collar, sweat beading on his forehead, despite the cool evening air drifting through the open windows. "Are you unwell, sir?" Jonas asked, appearing at his elbow with a towel. "Just warm in here," the man muttered, his pupils strangely dilated. "More wine." Jonas obliged, filling his glass again. The captain drank deeply, trying to quench a thirst that would only grow worse. Across the table, Mrs. Hargrove, wife of the wealthiest merchant in the county, pressed a hand to her stomach, her face growing pale beneath her rouge. "Such rich food tonight," she said to her companion, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. The string quartet continued to play, though now their cheerful melody seemed discordant against the increasing discomfort in the room. Conversation grew sporadic, punctuated by coughs and complaints about the heat. Mistress Beaumont, flushed with wine and still untouched by the poisons in the food she'd barely eaten, continued holding court. "My new silver service, imported directly from England, cost more than most men earn in 5 years, she boasted, gesturing with a jeweled hand. That's when the first scream came. Mr. Parsons, a planter known for working children in his fields until they collapsed, suddenly pitched forward into his stew. His body convulsed once, twice, then went terribly still, face down in the thick liquid. For a heartbeat, the room froze in tableau. Then chaos erupted. Mrs. Hargrove began to vomit, a stream of half-digested food splashing onto her expensive gown. Captain Merrick stood, knocking over his chair, then fell to his knees, clutching his throat as he gasped for air. Across the table, a merchant began to foam at the mouth, his eyes rolling back to show only the whites. "What is happening?" Mistress Beaumont shrieked, rising from her seat. Someone help them! But there was no help to be had. The poison was working its way through every system, shutting down organs, seizing muscles, stopping hearts. One by one, the guests collapsed, some silently sliding from their chairs, others with violent convulsions that sent silverware and glasses crashing to the floor. Jonas stood by the wall, silver tray still in hand, watching it all unfold. His face remained the carefully blank mask he'd worn for 20 years, but inside, a terrible joy mingled with horror at what he'd done. Mistress Beaumont staggered toward him, her face contorted with dawning realization. "You," she whispered, reaching for him with trembling hands. "What have you—" She never finished the sentence. Her eyes widened, her mouth opened in a silent scream, and then she crumpled to the floor, her beautiful gown pooling around her like spilled ink. The music had stopped. The only sounds now were gasps, moans, and the terrible wet noise of bodies emptying themselves in death. Jonas didn't move. He couldn't. He stood frozen, watching as the powerful became powerless, as the masters became nothing. Hours passed. The candles burned low, some guttering out entirely. The room grew cold as the night deepened. Still Jonas stood, a sentinel over the scene of his vengeance. When dawn finally broke, pale light filtered through the windows, illuminating a ghastly tableau. 30 bodies slumped over the grand table, sprawled on the floor, twisted in final agony. Food congealed in bowls, wine dried in sticky pools. Flies had already found their way in, beginning their own feast. Jonas finally moved, stepping into the doorway that led to the kitchen. Behind him, Ruth, Isaac, Mabel, and the others emerged from where they'd been hiding, their faces masks of shock and disbelief. "What have you done?" Isaac whispered, his voice barely audible. Jonas looked down at his hands. They were trembling now, the carefully controlled rage of years finally breaking free in waves of shudders. "What they have done to us," he answered, "I have returned to them." The quiet of death hung heavy over the Beaumont plantation. Outside the kitchen, in the shadow of the great house, the enslaved gathered in clusters, their voices a mix of whispers and frightened murmurs. Some huddled together, eyes wide with fear. Others stood apart, looking toward the house with something like wonder on their faces. Jonas stepped out into the yard, his white serving jacket stained with spilled wine and gravy. In his hand, he clutched a ring of iron keys, taken from the belt of the dead overseer who had collapsed near the pantry door, his plate of stolen kitchen scraps still warm beside him. "They dead?" Old Tom asked, his voice cracking. He was the oldest man on the plantation, his back permanently bent from 60 years in the cotton fields. "All of them," Jonas confirmed. His voice sounded strange to his own ears, as if it belonged to someone else. "Master, mistress, the guests, all dead." A soft wail rose from the back of the crowd. Ruth's mother, Sarah, pulled her daughter close, hiding the child's face against her skirts. "Lord, have mercy on us all," she prayed. "They'll kill us for this. They'll hunt us down like animals." "No one's hunting anybody," Jonas said, raising the keys. The metal caught the early morning light, glinting like treasure. "Not anymore." Without another word, he turned and walked toward the slave quarters, a row of cramped wooden cabins where 50 men, women, and children were locked in each night. The crowd followed him, some eagerly, others hanging back in uncertainty. The first cabin held the field hands, men who worked from sunup to sundown, cutting cane and picking cotton. Jonas slid the key into the heavy padlock and turned it. The lock fell open with a dull thunk that seemed to echo across the yard. He pushed the door wide. "No more chains," he said simply. The men emerged, blinking into the dawn light, confusion giving way to understanding as word spread in hurried whispers. Jonas moved to the next cabin, and the next, unlocking each door, repeating his message, "No more chains." When all the cabins stood open, the entire slave population of the Beaumont plantation gathered in the yard. Nearly 100 souls, from gray-headed elders to infants in arms. They looked to Jonas with expressions ranging from fear to hope to outright suspicion. Isaac pushed his way through the crowd. Always dignified even in his worn butler's uniform, he stood straight-backed before Jonas. "We need to leave," he said urgently. "Now, while we can. When they find the bodies—" "And go where?" Mabel interrupted, stepping forward. Her face was lined with years of service, her eyes sharp with practicality. "The woods? The swamps? How long before they hunt us down with dogs?" "Better than waiting here to be hanged," Isaac shot back. Voices rose around them, fear sharpening into argument. "I'm taking my children and running. They'll catch us before we reach the county line. Maybe if we say Jonas did it alone, God will protect us if we pray." Jonas looked at their faces, people he had lived alongside for years, some he had known since childhood. They were cooks and field hands, seamstresses and stable boys, not soldiers, not rebels, just people who had never been allowed to decide their own fates, until now. He raised his hands, and gradually the voices quieted. I did this, he said, his words falling into the sudden silence. I poisoned them. I watched them die. If anyone wants to run, run. If anyone wants to stay and tell the authorities I acted alone, stay. I won't stop you. He paused, looking from face to face. But know this, by noon, someone will come looking. A messenger, a late guest, a patrolman. And when they find what's in that dining room, there will be no mercy. Not for any of us. Not for the ones who run alone. Not for the ones who stay and beg. Ruth broke away from her mother and ran to Jonas, wrapping her thin arms around his waist. Don't leave us, she pleaded, her voice muffled against his jacket. Jonas put a gentle hand on her head. I'm not leaving anyone, he said. Then, louder. But we must move as one. Together we have a chance. Scattered, we're just frightened rabbits for their dogs to chase. Mabel stepped forward, her chin raised. I'm with you, Jonas. You've freed us. Now lead us. One by one, others stepped forward. Old Tom, Sarah, the blacksmith, Jerome, even Isaac, reluctantly nodding his agreement. What do we do? Someone called. Jonas took a deep breath. The mantle of leadership sat heavy on shoulders that had only ever carried trays and pots. First, we gather what we need. Food, weapons, clothes. Then we move, all of us, into the cane breaks beyond the north field. There's shelter there, and water from the creek. We'll send scouts to the neighboring plantations, spread word of what's happened here. To terrify them? Isaac asked. To invite them, Jonas corrected. To show them what's possible. For the first time since he'd carried out his deadly plan, Jonas felt something beyond rage and satisfaction. Something that might have been hope. They dispersed quickly, moving with purpose. Some headed to the storehouse for provisions, others to the tool shed for anything that might serve as a weapon. Mabel organized the women to gather blankets and clothing. Isaac, still doubtful but committed, led a group to the stables to prepare the horses. Jonas watched them work. No overseer needed, no whip required, just people determined to be free. As dawn broke fully over the plantation, Jonas walked to the edge of the yard and looked out toward the cane fields. They stretched for acres, tall green stalks waving gently in the morning breeze. Beyond them lay woods, then swamps, then unknown territory. A world most of them had never been allowed to see. Smoke from the kitchen chimney drifted overhead, carried away by the wind, the last remnants of the fatal feast. Soon that smoke would be seen from the road. Questions would be asked. Word would spread. And then the response would come. Jonas knew the neighboring plantations would not let this stand. A successful slave uprising, an entire household of white folks dead at their table. There would be militia. There would be posses. There would be blood. But for now, in this moment, as he watched his people moving with purpose and dignity for perhaps the first time in their lives, Jonas allowed himself to feel the full weight of what he had done, and what was yet to come. Dawn painted the sky pale gold as Jonas led the freed people away from the Beaumont estate. Nearly 100 souls moved through the morning mist, their steps uncertain but determined. Children clutched their mothers' hands, wide-eyed and silent. Old men and women leaned on improvised walking sticks, their faces set with grim resolve. "Keep moving," Jonas called softly over his shoulder. "Stay together." They carried whatever they had managed to salvage in the frantic hours after the massacre. Burlap sacks of cornmeal and dried beans from the storehouse, smoked ham and salted pork from the smokehouse, knives from the kitchen, axes and shovels from the tool shed, blankets and clothing bundled into makeshift packs. Ruth stumbled on the muddy path, nearly falling before Jonas caught her arm. Her small face pinched with exhaustion, but she didn't cry out. "You doing all right?" Jonas asked, keeping his voice gentle. She nodded solemnly. "Mama says we got to be quiet as mice." "Your mama's right," Jonas agreed, squeezing her shoulder before moving on. Sarah came up behind them, lifting Ruth onto her hip, despite the heavy bundle she already carried. "Hush now," she whispered when Ruth began to protest. Just a little further. The path grew rougher as they left the cleared plantation lands behind. Tangled undergrowth snagged at clothing and scratched exposed skin. The ground became soggy underfoot, each step releasing the earthy smell of decay and new growth. Isaac pushed through the group to reach Jonas's side, his face tight with concern. "We're leaving tracks a blind man could follow," he muttered. "Can't be helped," Jonas replied. "We need distance more than stealth right now." They pressed on as the sun climbed higher, the heat building even in the shade of the trees. The youngest children began to whimper with thirst and fatigue. Elderly folks struggled to keep pace, their breathing labored. By midday, they reached the edge of the swamp, a vast, shadowy world of cypress trees standing knee-deep in dark water. Spanish moss hung like gray beards from every branch, and the drone of insects filled the air. Jonas raised his hand, and the group halted gratefully. "We rest here," he announced. "Eat something, drink, but stay close." As the people settled in small groups, sharing food and water, Jonas beckoned to Mabel, Isaac, and Jerome. "The swamp will hide us," he explained, pointing to the maze of waterways and islands ahead. "But we need order if we're going to survive." Just as he had once organized the Beaumont kitchen, Jonas now divided their people into groups with specific tasks. Strong swimmers would scout safe paths through the water. The elderly would mind the children. Those with knowledge of plants would identify what was safe to eat. "We work in shifts," he instructed, the rhythm of kitchen discipline guiding his words. "No one sleeps until someone else is watching. No one eats until everyone has a share." Mabel nodded approvingly. "Like a proper household," she said. "But our own this time." By late afternoon, they had moved deeper into the swamp, finding refuge on a raised island of relatively dry ground. Cypress trees towered overhead, their massive trunks providing some shelter. Women laid out blankets for the children. Men constructed simple lean-tos using branches and moss. As darkness fell, Jerome managed to start a small, carefully contained fire. They roasted ears of corn salvaged from the plantation fields, passing them from hand to hand. The first quiet laugh came from Ruth, who giggled when hot corn juice dribbled down her chin. Then old Tom told a story about outsmarting a patroller when he was young, his wrinkled face animated in the firelight. Soon others joined in, sharing whispered tales and memories. Jonas watched them, these people who had lived under the same brutal system he had, yet still found reasons to smile. For the first time in years, perhaps since Clara had been sold away, he felt something like peace. The moment shattered when Ezra, one of the young men Jonas had sent to scout, crashed through the underbrush and into their camp. His chest heaved as he gasped for breath. "They know," he panted. "The plantations all around. They know what happened at Beaumont's." The circle fell silent, all eyes turning to Jonas. "How soon?" Jonas asked, his voice steady despite the fear clutching at his throat. "They're forming patrols now," Ezra reported. "Gathering dogs, guns. By morning they'll be hunting." Jonas nodded slowly, absorbing the news. He had expected this, but not so quickly. Someone must have visited the Beaumont place, discovered the carnage, and raised the alarm faster than he'd calculated. "Eat," he told the frightened people. "Rest while you can. Tomorrow, we move deeper into the swamp." The brief moment of joy was gone, replaced by the familiar weight of dread. Mothers pulled children closer. Men checked their makeshift weapons. The elderly closed their eyes in silent prayer. As the others settled into uneasy sleep, Jonas climbed to the highest point of their island refuge, where he could see past the tangled trees to the distant plantation lands. Far away, pinpricks of torchlight moved across the darkness, patrols already searching the edges of their territory. The night air carried sounds across the water. The splash of creatures moving in the shallows, the call of night birds, and, faintly but unmistakably, the baying of dogs. Jonas wrapped his arms around his knees, feeling the weight of all these lives now dependent on his decisions. He had been so focused on vengeance, on making the Beaumonts pay for their cruelty, that he hadn't fully considered what would come after. Freedom. Yes, but freedom hunted, freedom afraid. "They will come for us tomorrow," he whispered to himself, the words barely audible even to his own ears. The distant barking grew louder, carried on the night breeze. The first light of dawn filtered through the cypress trees, turning the swamp mist into a ghostly veil. Jonas was already awake, moving silently between the sleeping forms of his people. He touched shoulders, whispered urgent words, rousing them without sound. "They're coming," he murmured to Isaac, who rubbed sleep from his eyes. "I can hear the dogs." Isaac listened, then nodded grimly. "What do we do?" Jonas had spent the night planning, his mind working with the same precision he once used to time roasts and sauces in the Beaumont kitchen. "We can't outrun them. Not with the children and elders." He gathered the strongest men and women, outlining his plan in hushed tones. "We know this part of the swamp now. They don't." Within minutes, they scattered to their positions. Women herded children deeper into the swamp, to a sheltered island Jonas had discovered yesterday. Men and stronger women positioned themselves behind trees and in shallow water, armed with sharpened sticks, rocks, and kitchen knives. Jonas himself crouched beside a crude fire pit where 3 large pots, salvaged from the plantation, now bubbled with swamp water mixed with the rendered fat they'd scraped from their meager rations. Beside him, Mabel fed the fire carefully, keeping the smoke minimal. "Just like rendering lard for biscuits," she whispered, her face tense but determined. "Hotter," Jonas replied. "We need it to burn, not just cook." The distant barking grew closer. Then came the splash of boots in water, the crack of branches, and harsh voices calling to each other. "Found tracks over here! Fresh ones! Keep those dogs moving!" Through gaps in the cypress knees, Jonas counted 5 men, 2 overseers he recognized from neighboring plantations, and 3 others wearing the rough clothes of hired patrollers. 2 held leashed dogs straining at their leads. All carried guns. Jonas raised his hand. Around the swamp, his people went still as statues, barely breathing. The patrol splashed deeper into their territory, following the deliberate trail Jonas had left. They passed the first line of sharpened stakes hidden just beneath the murky water, moving exactly where Jonas had planned. He dropped his hand. From 3 directions, the freed slaves attacked. Ezra and Jerome burst from hiding, driving sharpened stakes into the closest patroller before he could raise his rifle. Sarah and 2 other women hurled rocks from behind cypress trees, striking another man in the head. The dogs barked furiously, trying to lunge in multiple directions as threats emerged from all sides. "Now!" Jonas shouted. He and Mabel each grabbed a pot of boiling oil, rushing forward to fling the scalding liquid at the remaining patrollers. Screams echoed across the swamp as the men flailed, their skin blistering instantly. One dropped his gun, which Jerome quickly snatched up. The dogs broke free in the chaos, but instead of attacking, they fled back the way they'd come, terrified by the screams and the unfamiliar swamp. It was over in moments. 2 patrollers lay dead, impaled on crude spears. The others writhed on the ground, burned and broken, their threats reduced to pained moans. Jonas stood over them, breathing hard, a bloody kitchen knife in his hand. "Take their guns," he ordered. "And their boots." Isaac moved to his side, eyes wide. "I never thought," he began, then stopped. "We actually beat them." "This time," Jonas said, wiping sweat from his brow. "There'll be more." Throughout the day, they strengthened their position. Jonas organized teams to set more traps along likely approach routes. Others constructed better shelters on the drier islands. The newly acquired guns were given to those who knew how to use them, mostly men who had hunted with their masters. By mid-afternoon, a surprise arrived. 3 unfamiliar black men appeared at the edge of their territory, hands raised to show they meant no harm. "We heard what happened at Beaumont's," their leader explained when brought to Jonas, words spreading. "We ran from the Wilkins plantation last night." "You're welcome here," Jonas said, "if you'll work with us, not against us." More came as the day progressed, 5 from another plantation, then a family of 4 who had been hiding in the woods for days. Each brought news from beyond the swamp. Patrols were forming all across the county. Bounties were being offered, but also whispers of hope were spreading among the enslaved. "They're saying a cook poisoned his masters," one man told Jonas, not realizing he spoke to that very cook. "They're saying maybe we ain't as helpless as they thought." As darkness fell again, their numbers had grown to nearly 130 souls. The campfire that night burned brighter, ringed by people who dared to look at each other as equals for the first time. Jonas moved among them, giving quiet instructions, resolving disputes, allocating resources with the same careful attention he once gave to the Beaumont pantry. People listened when he spoke, followed his directions without question, not from fear, but from growing trust. "It's like you were born to lead, not serve," Mabel observed, passing him a portion of the day's meager stew. Jonas shook his head. "I was born free. Then they made me a slave. Now, I'm just trying to be free again." Later, as the night deepened and the initial tension of the day's battle began to ease, Isaac approached the fire where Jonas sat, contemplating their next move. "Got to hand it to you," Isaac said, settling beside him. "You've become quite the master of fire." He gestured to the cooking pots still crusted with the oil that had saved them, from kitchen to battlefield, and still using what you know. A few people nearby chuckled nervously at first, then with more confidence. The joke spread around the circle, the irony of a former slave becoming master of anything, even fire, striking them as both terrifying and wonderful. Soon the camp was filled with cautious laughter, the sound strange to ears more accustomed to whispers and silence. Some began to hum, then sing softly, old songs with new meaning, rhythms that had once marked endless labor, now celebrating their first taste of victory. Children, who had hidden in terror that morning, now nestled against their parents, eyelids growing heavy as the singing washed over them. One by one, they drifted to sleep, their faces peaceful in the firelight. Jonas watched them, these children of slaves, sleeping as free people might sleep, with full bellies and songs in their ears. For this moment, at least, they had carved out a pocket of freedom in this hostile land. The singing continued, soft and sweet, rising into the night sky above their hidden camp. 2 weeks later, the air hung heavy with humidity, as Jonas led a small group through the underbrush. The night pressed down on them, hot and sticky, while crickets screamed their summer song so loudly it nearly drowned out the sound of their careful footsteps. 8 of them moved like shadows, Jonas, Isaac, Jerome, and 5 others who had proven themselves quick and quiet in previous skirmishes. Ahead, through a break in the trees, they could make out their target, a small colonial armory that served the local militia. It was little more than a sturdy cabin with a single chimney, but inside lay what they desperately needed, real weapons to replace their makeshift spears and stolen kitchen knives. Jonas held up his hand, and the group froze. They'd spent days watching the armory, learning the patterns of the guards. Tonight, there would be only 3 men, fewer than usual because so many had joined the larger patrols searching the swamps. "Remember," Jonas whispered, "the one by the door first, then the 2 inside. Quick and quiet." Isaac nodded, gripping a heavy stick. "Just like we planned." The moon slipped behind a cloud, darkening the clearing around the armory. Jonas gave the signal, and they moved forward, bent low, using every shadow for cover. The guard at the door leaned against the wall, half asleep in the oppressive heat. He didn't notice Jonas and Jerome approaching until they were almost upon him. His eyes widened, his mouth opened to shout, but Isaac's club caught him in the back of the head before he could make a sound. He crumpled to the ground. "Tie him," Jonas ordered, then turned to the door. He could hear voices inside, the clatter of dice on a table. Everything happened fast after that. They burst through the door, overwhelming the startled guards before they could reach their weapons. One guard went down under Jerome's weight. The other swung a fist that connected with Isaac's jaw before 3 others tackled him to the floor. "Bind them," Jonas said, already moving toward the racks of muskets that lined the back wall. "Gag them, too." The armory's bounty exceeded their hopes. 23 muskets stood in orderly rows. Barrels of gunpowder sat beneath a table. Boxes of lead shot and flints filled a shelf. In a corner cabinet, they found a dozen sabers and pistols reserved for officers. "Take it all," Jonas instructed, passing out canvas sacks. "Powder, shot, everything." They worked quickly, emptying the racks and shelves. Outside, 2 more of their group had brought a small cart hidden earlier in the trees. They loaded it carefully, covering the weapons with blankets. As they finished, Jonas paused to look at the bound guards. "We're not going to kill you," he told them. "Remember that. We could have, but we didn't." One guard stared back with hatred in his eyes. The other looked away, trembling. The return journey took longer, burdened as they were with their prize. They avoided the main paths, instead following the twisted trail Jonas had scouted days before. By the time they reached the edge of their swamp territory, the eastern sky was turning pale gray. Sentries spotted them first, passing word back to the camp. As they approached the main island, people emerged from shelters, eyes widening at the sight of the cart piled high with weapons. A murmur rippled through the crowd, growing to excited chatter. "Is that? Muskets! Real muskets! And powder, too." Jonas directed the unloading, assigning the weapons to those who knew how to use them. Some had hunted with their masters. Others had cleaned and loaded guns but never fired them. A few had even fought in colonial militias before being returned to slavery. "We train everyone," Jonas announced. "Starting today." The camp hummed with a new energy. Children ran between adults, imitating soldiers with sticks. Women sorted the powder and shot into smaller containers for storage. Men examined the muskets with reverent hands, feeling their weight and balance. As night fell again, the normal caution that governed their hidden community gave way to celebration. Someone produced a hidden fiddle. Another found a drum. The music began softly, then grew bolder as more joined in. They danced around the fire, passing bottles of cornmeal whiskey that had been traded from other runaways. People who had lived in constant fear now moved with a new confidence, bodies swaying, feet stomping in rhythms brought from across the ocean and preserved through generations of bondage. Jonas watched from the edge of the firelight, allowing himself, for the first time, to really believe in possibility. With weapons, they could defend this place. With weapons, they might carve out a permanent settlement deep in the swamp. They could hunt freely, build stronger cabins, plant crops in hidden clearings. Isaac found him there, offering a tin cup of whiskey. "Drink, Jonas. Tonight we celebrate." Jonas took a small sip, feeling the burn down his throat. "We need to be careful. This isn't over." "I know," Isaac said. "But look at them." He gestured to the dancers, to the children playing, to the old men teaching younger ones how to clean the new muskets. For the first time they believe. They can see a future. Jonas nodded slowly. He could see it too. A village of free people. Children who never knew chains. Elders who could rest their bones without fear of the lash. Perhaps they could even trade with sympathetic farmers, or with the native tribes further west. They could build something lasting. We'll need to send scouts further out, he said, thinking aloud. Set up warning systems. Train everyone who can hold a gun. Tomorrow, Isaac insisted. Tonight, even the general gets to dance. Before Jonas could protest, Isaac pulled him toward the fire. The crowd parted, welcoming him into their circle with cheers and clapping hands. For a few precious hours, Jonas let himself forget the constant vigilance, the plans and counterplans always spinning in his head. He danced until his legs ached, laughed until his sides hurt. When he finally collapsed by the fire, exhausted but content, he stared up at the stars through breaks in the cypress canopy. Perhaps this was what freedom truly felt like. Not just the absence of chains, but the presence of joy. The celebration continued late into the night, gradually quieting as people drifted to their shelters. Jonas was one of the last awake, watching the embers die down, planning the training that would begin at dawn. Morning came too quickly, the eastern sky blushing pink through the trees. Jonas rose stiffly, his body remembering last night's dancing. He moved to the edge of the water to splash his face, trying to clear his head. The sound of splashing footsteps made him turn. A young man, one who had joined them just days ago from a nearby plantation, came running through the shallow water, his chest heaving with exertion. "Jonas!" he gasped, barely able to speak. "Jonas! They're coming!" Jonas gripped the man's shoulders. "Slow down. Tell me." The runner gulped air. "Militia. Hundreds of them. From 3 counties. They've joined forces. They have cannons." A cold weight settled in Jonas's stomach. "How long?" 2 days. Maybe 3. The runner bent over, hands on his knees. "That's not all. They know exactly where we are. Every trail. Every shelter." "How?" Jonas demanded. The runner looked up, his eyes hollow with fear. "Someone told them. Someone from here." The camp awakened to chaos. Jonas called everyone to gather at the central clearing, his face hard as stone. People stumbled from their shelters, bleary-eyed and confused, the celebration of the previous night forgotten. "Someone has betrayed us," Jonas announced, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd. "The militia knows our location, every path, every hiding spot." Murmurs rippled through the group. Neighbors glanced at each other with newfound suspicion. Friends who had danced together hours ago now stood apart, uncertain. "Who arrived in the last week?" Isaac asked, standing at Jonas's side. "We need to know who might have come to spy." 5 people stepped forward, 3 men and 2 women who had escaped from neighboring plantations. They stood nervous and exposed as all eyes turned to them. "I ain't no traitor," a woman said, her voice shaking. "I ran from Master Thompson's place when they whipped my boy half to death." Another nodded vigorously. "I've been running 3 weeks before I found y'all. Why would I lead them here after all that?" Jonas studied each face carefully. 4 showed fear, the natural fear of the accused. But the 5th, a wiry young man named Samuel, had something different in his eyes, something calculating. "Samuel," Jonas said quietly, "you joined us 4 days ago. Said you escaped from the Wilkins plantation." Samuel nodded, his eyes darting between Jonas and the edge of the clearing. "That's right." "Strange," Jonas continued, "because Jerome here worked the Wilkins fields for 20 years. He says he never saw you there." Samuel's face twitched. I was kept in the house mostly." "No house slaves at Wilkins," Jerome said firmly. "Old man Wilkins don't trust us near his family." A heavy silence fell. Samuel's hand moved slowly toward his waistband. "Don't," Jonas warned, pulling his knife. "Whatever you're reaching for, don't." 2 men grabbed Samuel's arms. When they searched him, they found a small pistol tucked in his belt, one of the weapons they'd stolen just hours before. "You going to kill me now?" Samuel asked, his voice suddenly steady. Prove you're no better than the masters? Jonas stepped closer. Why? Why lead them to us? Samuel's face twisted into a bitter smile. They promised me freedom. Real freedom. Papers and all. Said I could go north. And you believed them? Mabel cried from the crowd. I believed in saving my own skin, Samuel shot back. What was I supposed to do? Die with the rest of you? They're coming with hundreds of men. Cannons. You think your stolen muskets will stop that? Jonas felt a wave of exhaustion. When did you tell them? How long do we have? 2 days. Maybe 3 if the rain slows them. Samuel looked around at the angry faces surrounding him. They'll kill most of you. Take the strongest back to the fields. That's what the captain said. Voices erupted around them. Hang him! Cut his throat! Make him suffer like he'd have us suffer. Jonas raised his hand for silence. We're not animals, he said. We're not them. So what then? Isaac asked, his voice tense. We just let him go? He'll run straight back to them. No. Jonas met Samuel's gaze. We can't let him go. Samuel struggled suddenly against the men holding him. You said you weren't like them. You promised. I said we're not animals, Jonas replied quietly. I didn't say we're fools. He turned to the crowd. We've all lost too much to risk everything now. This man chose his side. Jonas looked at Isaac, who nodded grimly. 4 men took Samuel to the edge of the camp where the ground was softer. Jonas followed, feeling the weight of every step. Dig, he ordered, handing Samuel a shovel. My own grave, Samuel asked, his bravado crumbling into fear. Please, Jonas. I was desperate. You understand desperate. I understand loyalty, Jonas replied. Start digging. The hole wasn't deep when Jonas decided it was enough. The crowd had followed at a distance, watching in silence as Samuel dropped the shovel and fell to his knees. Make it quick, Samuel whispered, tears streaming down his face. Please. Jonas had killed before. The guests at the banquet, the overseers who came after them. But never like this. Never someone who knelt before him. His hand trembled as he raised his pistol. The shot echoed through the trees. Birds scattered from branches overhead. Samuel slumped forward into the shallow grave. Fill it, Jonas ordered, his voice hollow. He handed the pistol to Isaac and walked away, as the first shovelfuls of dirt fell. The execution changed something in the camp. Fear bound them tighter, yes, but a chill had settled over their fragile community. Children were kept close. Conversations happened in whispers. The joy of the previous night felt like a dream from another life. Throughout the day, scouts returned with increasingly grim reports. The militia forces were massive. Nearly 300 men from 3 counties, with mounted officers and 2 small cannons. They moved methodically, checking every possible hiding place. Jonas directed the preparations with grim efficiency. They built barricades of fallen logs and sharpened stakes. They distributed the weapons and what little ammunition they had. They prepared escape routes for the children and elderly. But Jonas knew, they all knew, it wouldn't be enough. Not against cannons and trained militiamen. Night fell, and Jonas found himself unable to sleep. The weight of responsibility crushed down on him. How many would die because of his decision at the Beaumont dinner table? The poison had seemed like justice then. Now it felt like the first domino in a line stretching toward disaster. He walked to the edge of the camp where Samuel lay buried. The fresh dirt mound was barely visible in the darkness. I did what I had to do, Jonas whispered to the grave. You gave me no choice. But doubt gnawed at him. Had there been another way? Could he have imprisoned Samuel instead? Used him somehow? Or was death the only option? Jonas returned to the main fire where Isaac kept watch. Above them, thunder rumbled as storm clouds gathered, blotting out the stars. Can't sleep? Isaac asked, making room on the log. Jonas sat heavily. Every time I close my eyes, I see his face. Samuel's. Isaac nodded. Better his face than the faces of all the children here if he'd led them straight to us. I know. Jonas poked at the fire with a stick. But I never wanted to be a man who executes others. That was their way, not ours. War makes us all into people we never thought we'd be, Isaac said quietly. And make no mistake, Jonas, this is war now. The fire crackled between them as thunder rolled closer. The first fat raindrops began to fall, hissing as they hit the flames. "Storm's coming," Isaac observed. Jonas stared into the fire as the rain began to fall harder, turning the ground to mud around them. The storm would slow the militia, but not stop them. Nothing could stop what was coming now. "This storm will break with blood," Jonas whispered, more to himself than to Isaac. "No matter what we do, it ends in blood." Dawn broke gray and misty over the swamp. Jonas stood at the barricade, watching the fog curl between cypress trunks. The rain had stopped hours ago, leaving everything damp and heavy. He hadn't slept at all. "They're coming," a scout whispered, materializing from the mist. "Moving slow through the eastern path. Hundreds of them." Jonas nodded, his throat tight. "Everyone to positions," he ordered. "Remember what we planned." The camp stirred to life as word spread. Men and women grabbed weapons, the precious few muskets they'd stolen, axes, sharpened farm tools, kitchen knives. Children were hurried to hiding spots deep in the swamp, the youngest ones crying in confusion until mothers shushed them with urgent whispers. Ruth, the small kitchen girl, tugged at Jonas's sleeve. "I want to help fight," she insisted, her thin face determined. "No." Jonas knelt to her level. "You help Mabel with the powder and bandages. Stay low, stay hidden." Mabel appeared, gathering Ruth against her side. "Come, child. We got work to do." Jonas watched them go, then turned to face the eastern path. Isaac stood beside him, gripping a musket with white knuckles. "You ever fired one before?" Jonas asked. Isaac shook his head. "Saw it done plenty, though. Aim low," Jonas advised. "The kick sends it high." The first shot came without warning, a sharp crack that echoed across the water. Birds scattered from the trees, then silence, heavy and terrible. "Hold," Jonas commanded as fingers tightened on triggers. "Wait until they're close." Shapes appeared in the mist. Men in militia uniforms moving cautiously between trees. Jonas counted 20, then 40, then stopped counting. "Now!" he shouted when they reached the clearing's edge. The rebels' guns erupted in ragged volleys. Militia soldiers dropped, surprise written across their faces. They hadn't expected real resistance. The survivors scrambled for cover, returning fire. Gunsmoke drifted across the clearing, thick and acrid. Jonas crouched behind the barricade, reloading his pistol with shaking hands. Beside him, a man cried out and fell backward, blood blooming across his chest. The militia regrouped quickly. More men poured from the trees, spreading out to surround the camp. Bullets splintered wood inches from Jonas's head. "They're flanking us!" Isaac shouted, pointing to the right where soldiers waded through shallow water. Jonas signaled to a group on the western edge. "Cut them off!" he yelled. "Use the traps." 5 rebels disappeared into the underbrush. Moments later, screams erupted as militia soldiers stumbled into hidden pits lined with sharpened stakes. But for every soldier that fell, 3 more took his place. The militia commander had numbers and training on his side. They advanced methodically, tightening their circle around the rebel camp. Women ran between barricades, carrying powder and shot to the fighters. Ruth darted among them, surprisingly quick and silent. Jonas caught glimpses of her small form ducking under branches, delivering messages between groups. By midday, the rebels were pushed back to the center of camp. The barricades were breached in 3 places. Half their fighters were dead or wounded. "Jonas!" Mabel called, waving frantically from behind a fallen tree. "The children! Soldiers found the hiding spot!" Cold fear washed through him. Jonas grabbed 2 men and raced after Mabel. splashing through the swamp toward a tangle of brush where they'd hidden the youngest children. They arrived to find Mabel already engaging the soldiers, a middle-aged maid armed only with a kitchen knife against 3 militiamen with muskets. She'd positioned herself between the soldiers and the brush pile, where small faces peered out in terror. "Run!" she screamed at the children as she lunged at a soldier. Her knife caught him in the arm. He cursed and swung his musket like a club, catching her across the temple. Mabel crumpled to the ground. Jonas fired his pistol, dropping 1 soldier. The other 2 turned toward the new threat. In the confusion, the children scrambled from their hiding place, scattering into the swamp like frightened rabbits. A musket ball tore through Jonas's left shoulder, spinning him around. Pain exploded down his arm, but he kept his grip on his knife. He staggered forward, stabbing upward as a soldier raised his bayonet. The man fell, gurgling. Jonas dropped to his knees beside Mabel. Her eyes stared sightlessly at the sky, blood pooling beneath her head. "No," he whispered, touching her cooling cheek. "No, no." A small sob drew his attention. Ruth huddled behind a cypress knee, clutching her side where blood seeped between her fingers. "Ruth!" Jonas crawled to her, ignoring the fire in his shoulder. "Let me see." The bullet had grazed her ribs, painful but not immediately deadly. Jonas tore a strip from his shirt to bind the wound. "Mabel," Ruth whimpered, looking past him. "Is she—" "She saved the children," Jonas said, his voice breaking. "She was very brave." Gunfire intensified from the direction of the camp. Jonas helped Ruth to her feet. "We need to move deeper into the swamp," he said. "Can you walk?" She nodded, biting her lip against the pain. By the time they returned to camp, it was overrun. Militia soldiers swarmed through the shelters, setting fire to everything. Captured rebels were being bound and lined up, faces bloody and defeated. Others lay dead on the ground. "This way," Jonas whispered, pulling Ruth behind a fallen log. They crawled through mud and reeds, working their way to the southwestern edge where the swamp grew densest. As darkness fell, Jonas found 7 other survivors huddled in a small clearing. Isaac, 3 men, 2 women, and 1 terrified child. Their faces brightened briefly at the sight of Jonas, then fell when they saw how few had escaped. "The others?" Isaac asked, helping Jonas lower Ruth to the ground. Jonas shook his head. "Captured or dead. Mabel's gone." Smoke choked the night air, carrying the smell of their burning camp. In the distance, they could hear militia parties crashing through the undergrowth, hunting for escapees. Jonas pressed a hand to his wounded shoulder, feeling warm blood still seeping through his makeshift bandage. His head spun with exhaustion and blood loss. They had no food, few weapons, and nowhere to go. "What now?" a woman asked, her voice barely audible. Jonas stared into the darkness, realization settling cold in his gut. They couldn't outfight the militia. That approach had failed utterly. They couldn't outrun them either, not with wounded and children. "We need a different way," he murmured, remembering the Beaumont banquet. "Something they won't expect." 3 days passed in misery. The small group of survivors huddled in a half-collapsed shack deep in the swamp, a forgotten hunter's shelter overtaken by moss and rot. The roof leaked when it rained, which it did often. The floor was perpetually muddy. Jonas sat against a moldy wall, pressing a damp cloth to his festering shoulder wound. Fever came and went in waves. During clearer moments, he took stock of their situation, each inventory more grim than the last. "Last of the cornmeal," Isaac announced, scraping the bottom of their only pot. He divided the thin gruel between 8 wooden bowls. "Barely enough for everyone." The child, a boy named Sam, received the largest portion. Ruth, still nursing her side wound, got the second largest. Jonas insisted on the smallest. "Militia patrols still circling," said Tom, a field hand who joined from a neighboring plantation. "Getting closer each time." Jonas nodded weakly. Their hiding place wouldn't remain secret much longer. The militia had established a proper camp at the edge of the swamp, bringing in supplies and reinforcements. They were settling in for a long hunt. That night, as the others slept fitfully, Jonas stared at the broken ceiling. Rain pattered through the gaps, creating small puddles on the dirt floor. His mind wandered to his mother, her gentle hands sorting leaves and roots, teaching him which plants healed and which killed. "This one brings fever," she'd whispered, showing him a purple-spotted leaf. "This one stops the heart." Her knowledge, passed down through generations, had been meant for healing. Jonas had turned it to vengeance. A thought took shape in his burning mind. He couldn't defeat the militia with weapons, but perhaps with what he knew best. Morning brought a break in the rain. Jonas pushed himself up, wincing as his wound protested. "Isaac," he called softly. "Come sit with me." The butler approached, concern etched in the lines of his face. "You should rest, Jonas." "No time for rest." Jonas gestured for Isaac to come closer. "I need your eyes. Tell me what you saw in the militia camp." Isaac had scouted the previous day, creeping close enough to count tents and soldiers. 30 tents, maybe 100 men, Isaac reported. Supply wagons at the north edge. Cook fires going all day. "What about food stores?" Jonas asked, his voice urgent despite its weakness. Isaac thought for a moment. Barrels stacked under canvas, grain sacks, salted meat hanging from racks to dry. Jonas nodded, his eyes glittering with fever and purpose. "That's our target." "The food?" Isaac looked confused. "What weapon brought down the Beaumonts?" Jonas asked. "Not guns, not knives." Understanding dawned on Isaac's face. "Poison." "We can't fight them directly," Jonas said, "but we can make them fight themselves." He explained his plan, speaking in low tones so the others wouldn't hear. Isaac's expression shifted from doubt to grim determination. "We'll need herbs," Jonas said. "Certain mushrooms. I'll show you what to look for." Despite his weakness, Jonas directed Ruth and Tom to gather plants from the swamp, innocent collectors as far as any patrol might see. By sunset, they had assembled a small pile of deadly ingredients: water hemlock roots, certain toadstools, foxglove leaves. "Tonight," Jonas told Isaac, as they prepared the toxins, "while they're sleeping." Ruth watched them work, her young face troubled. "You're going to kill them all? Even the ones who might be good men?" Jonas paused, his hands stilling over the crushed plants. "Good men don't hunt people like animals," he said finally. "Good men don't put chains on others." Night fell thick and moonless, perfect for their purpose. Jonas struggled to his feet, refusing Isaac's suggestion that he stay behind. "You don't know the mixtures," Jonas insisted. "How much to use? What to combine?" They left the others with strict instructions. If they didn't return by dawn, flee deeper into the swamp. Ruth clung to Jonas before he left, her thin arms careful of his wound. "Come back," she whispered. The two men moved through the swamp like shadows, wading through shallow water to avoid leaving tracks. Jonas's wound throbbed with each step, but he pressed on. The militia camp glowed ahead, lanterns marking the perimeter guards. "There," Isaac whispered, pointing to the supply area. Canvas-covered barrels stood in neat rows, guarded by a single dozing soldier. They crept closer, freezing when the guard shifted in his sleep. Jonas motioned for Isaac to circle behind the man while he prepared the poisons. Isaac moved silently, years of butler training evident in his careful steps. One quick motion, and he had the guard in a chokehold. The man struggled briefly before going limp. "Tied, not dead," Isaac whispered when he rejoined Jonas. "He'll wake with a headache." Jonas nodded approval as he uncorked the first barrel. The smell of cornmeal rose from inside. He sprinkled the first mixture across the top, then stirred it deep with a stick. They moved methodically through the supplies. Grain, flour, dried beans, all received their share of deadly additives. Jonas poured a concentrated solution into water barrels, watching it disappear into the dark liquid. At the meat-drying racks, Jonas applied a paste that would look like salt in the dim light. The last of his mixtures went into the cooking pots, left ready for morning. "That should be enough," Jonas whispered, sweat pouring down his face, despite the cool night. His legs trembled beneath him. They were halfway back to the swamp when a shout rang out. A patrol had spotted them. "Run!" Isaac urged, supporting Jonas's weakening frame. They splashed through shallow water as musket fire cracked behind them. Jonas felt a sudden impact that spun him around. Fire bloomed in his chest. A second bullet had found him. He fell face first into the water. Isaac grabbed him, dragging him toward the tree line as more shots peppered the water around them. "Leave me!" Jonas gasped. "Too heavy!" "No!" Isaac hauled him behind a fallen tree as bullets thudded into wood. "Not leaving you." Somehow, Isaac managed to pull them both deeper into the swamp, losing the patrol in the tangled brush. By the time they stopped, Jonas could barely breathe. Blood soaked his shirt front, mixing with swamp water. "It's done," Isaac panted, propping Jonas against a cypress trunk. "We made it." Jonas tried to smile, but his lips felt numb. "You made it," he corrected softly. "I'm finished." "Don't talk like that," Isaac said, tearing strips from his shirt to press against the wound. "We'll get you back to the others." Jonas shook his head slightly. "Listen to me," he whispered. "By tomorrow, that camp will be chaos. Men dropping, vomiting, dying. They'll blame bad water, spoiled food. No one will hunt you for a while." Isaac's hands stilled. "Jonas, lead them north," Jonas continued, his voice growing fainter. "There are free settlements, people who'll help." "I can't lead them," Isaac protested. "I'm just a butler. You're the one they follow." Jonas reached up with trembling fingers, gripping Isaac's wrist. "You're more than that. You always were." He coughed, tasting copper. "Promise me. Get them to safety." Isaac's eyes glistened in the darkness. "I promise." Jonas relaxed against the tree, his breath coming in shorter gasps. In the distance, fires from the militia camp reflected off low-hanging clouds, turning the night sky a dull orange. "Clara," Jonas murmured, seeing not the swamp but his wife's face, beautiful and sad. "I'm coming." His fingers slipped from Isaac's wrist. His last breath escaped in a soft sigh. The swamp fires reflected in his open eyes, until Isaac gently closed them. 3 days after Jonas died, the swamp fell silent. The militia drums stopped. The hunting dogs no longer bayed. Even gunfire ceased. Isaac crouched at the edge of their hiding place, watching thin columns of smoke rise from the distant camp. Something was wrong there. Very wrong. "What do you see?" Tom asked, joining him at the lookout. "Not much movement," Isaac replied. "No patrols in the water since yesterday." Tom squinted through the morning mist. "Think they gave up?" "Militia don't give up hunting runaways," Isaac said. "Not unless something happened." They returned to the shack where the survivors huddled, 8 souls, counting Ruth, who was finally strong enough to sit up. Isaac had kept his promise to Jonas, taking charge despite his doubts. But food was running out. They couldn't hide forever. "I'm going closer," Isaac announced. "Need to see what's happening." Ruth grabbed his sleeve. "Don't leave us," she pleaded, her eyes large in her thin face. Isaac gently patted her hand. "I'll come back," just like Jonas would have. He moved cautiously through the swamp, alert for traps or ambushes. As he neared the militia camp, strange sounds reached him. Groaning, retching. The smell hit him next. Not just campfire smoke, but something sickly sweet. Death. From behind a cypress tree, Isaac saw the devastation. Men lay sprawled across the ground, some writhing, others still. Those still on their feet stumbled about like drunks. A horse lay dead in its traces, bloated in the sun. Another thrashed weakly nearby. Jonas's poison had worked. Isaac watched as an officer tried to organize the few healthy soldiers. "Burn everything!" the man shouted, his voice cracking. "The water, the food, it's all tainted." Barrels were smashed open, their contents soaked with oil and set ablaze. Sacks of grain were slashed and scattered. Even cooking pots were thrown into the fire. "It's the swamp," a soldier cried, his face pale with fear. "It's cursed! The devil walks here!" Isaac slipped away, a grim smile on his face. By nightfall, he returned to the others with the news. "The militia is leaving. Most are too sick to fight. The rest are too scared." The next morning confirmed it. A pitiful column of soldiers staggered away from the swamp, leaving their dead behind. Isaac watched them go, then led his small band in the opposite direction, north toward freedom. They traveled for days, avoiding roads and settlements. Sometimes they found help. A sympathetic farmer who looked away while they took vegetables from his field. A free black man who guided them to hidden springs. Other times they faced hostility, barking dogs, suspicious looks, hastily loaded guns. But the militia never returned. Word had spread of the poisoned swamp, where an entire company had been struck down by mysterious illness. Even slave catchers avoided the area, whispering that ghosts walked there. At each plantation they passed, Isaac made contact with those still in chains. He shared food when he could, but more importantly, he shared the story. "There was a cook," he would begin, speaking in hushed tones while lookouts watched for overseers. "A man who knew herbs and spices, who could turn a simple meal into something special." Enslaved listeners would lean closer as Isaac continued. The masters thought he was just a cook, someone who knew his place. But he had been watching, learning, planning. He told of the harvest banquet, how Jonas had served death on silver platters, how he had later poisoned an entire militia camp. Isaac never exaggerated. The truth was powerful enough. "He showed us that what they think is our weakness can be our strength," Isaac would conclude. "Kitchen herbs, cooking skills, things they ignore because they think they're safe." The story spread like fire through dry grass. From plantation to plantation, from field to kitchen, the tale of Jonas the cook grew. With each telling, details shifted slightly. Sometimes he became a giant of a man. Other times, a shadow who could slip through locked doors. But the heart remained the same. A cook who used his master's contempt against them. 6 weeks after leaving the swamp, Isaac's group reached a settlement of free blacks and escaped slaves hidden in the hills. They were welcomed, given shelter, allowed to rest. For the first time, Ruth slept without fear. The settlement had its own stories of resistance, its own heroes and martyrs. But they listened with wide eyes when Isaac shared Jonas's tale around their community fire. "I knew him," Isaac said simply. "I watched him die so others could live." A year passed, then another. Isaac helped build the settlement into a stronger community. Ruth grew taller, her wound healing into a puckered scar she wore without shame. She became known for her memory, for the stories she kept alive. On summer nights, when the younger children gathered, Ruth would often be asked to tell the favorite tale. "Tell us about the cook," they would beg, even those who had heard it many times. Ruth would wait until they settled, the firelight casting dancing shadows across her serious face. Then she would begin, her voice soft but carrying. "There was a man named Jonas who worked in the kitchen of a great house. His hands could coax flavor from the plainest food, but in his heart he carried something the masters couldn't see, the memory of everyone he had lost to their cruelty." The children would listen, spellbound, as she recounted how Jonas had turned the master's feast into their funeral, how he had later poisoned the militia's supplies, turning their strength to weakness. "They thought because he cooked their food, he was harmless," Ruth would say. "They never imagined he was memorizing their habits, learning their weaknesses, measuring out justice in cups and spoons. As the story neared its end, her voice would grow more intense, her eyes reflecting the flames. "Remember this," she would tell the wide-eyed children. "The cook fed death to the master. He fed freedom to—" In the shadows beyond the fire, Isaac would listen silently, remembering the quiet man who had changed everything, not with a sword or a gun, but with herbs and patience and terrible purpose. The legend of Jonas the cook lived on, whispered in kitchens, murmured in fields, told around fires. A warning to those who would own others, a promise to those still in chains. Freedom could come from unexpected places, even from a kitchen. I hope you found that story powerful. Leave a like on the video and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. I have handpicked 2 stories for you that are even more powerful. Have a great day!